So I went in to observe a lesson, first grade, and the math teak was, I'm going to simplify it, counting by 2s, 5s, and 10s. And that's what the teacher did. Everything was counting by 2s, 5s, and 10s. She didn't read the whole teak. The whole teak was to be able to group numbers by 2s, 5s, and 10s to be able to count the total amount. So completely different lesson than counting 2s, 5s, and 10s. I don't think they take time to read the entire teak and understand that, like, that teak was then a prerequisite for algebra, and there was none of that correlation or connection as to how important it was to be able to grab a group of things. And so, but we're not giving them the time. My big thing this year is, how am I going to give them the time to look at those teaks, study them, and understand really what that's connecting up to here for them to be able to teach it.
Naively, I have thought, well, why can't we extend the school day?
They shortened it.
Huh?
And now they shortened it, the time.
Yeah.
But extended for teachers.
Yeah, extended for teachers. I don't see that working with your teachers, but they're, especially in states where they have unions, they are so adamant. I mean, if their work day is at 4, they're out of the door. I don't see that in Texas. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But that, in my opinion, I found that if I make the students go back and put in, what do the benchmarks for science literacy say about that text? What do each of these standards say? They're going to say it in different words. So my hope is by the time they go through and put those in, they're going to have a better understanding of what that takes. I went into a 5th grade science class, actually with one of my student teachers a few years ago, and they were doing a lab, and I looked at the learning objective up on the board, and it was a typical kind of lab to where they were looking at forms of energy, electrical and chemical, etc. And so I looked at the learning objective on the board, and I looked at it again, and I looked at it again, and I thought, I don't understand what that means. So I asked the cooperating teacher. I said, what does that mean? I said, I don't understand that. And the cooperating teacher couldn't explain it. I said, well, where's that in the text? So we went back to the text on this particular one, and it wasn't anything like what the text said. And I had already watched the lab, and I hadn't really looked at the learning objective, and the kids were not getting it. And so I'm starting to look at the lesson then, the structure of the lesson. And I said, well, no wonder the kids are not understanding it. I don't even understand that learning objective. How can you have a learning objective that makes no sense and plan lessons that support that learning objective?
Driving instruction. And
yeah, right. So, that is really critical on understanding the text. And I hear a lot of principals say their teachers don't understand their text. And I'm thinking, well, if a principal doesn't understand science or math, how do they know? But you just gave a great example of how a principal would know.
I think too, this is going to sound terrible, I think Pinterest and Teachers Pay Teachers have watered down education. So I think teachers look at a teak and they're like, oh, it's counting by 2, 5s, and 10s. Let me look on the internet and see what cute activity can be done so that kids get this.
Yeah.
Miss the entire concept. The textbook did a much better job teaching that teak than the cutesy little activities the kids were doing in class to teach the teak.
So how do you overcome that with a principal? What do you do when you see that more than one example?
I changed my team planning that they had to turn into me a template of what was the teak. Like I had what's the teak, what are the vocabulary words and verbs that go along with it. I did certain sections and they had to talk about it, and a lot of my teachers said that completely changed the way they planned. Because they were having conversations in their grade levels, and they were having, it was tight, they could type it up so it didn't take forever, but because I didn't feel like conversations were happening even about teaks. It was, hey, this is
cute idea. And elementary teachers are very creative. They're much more creative than high school. Oh yeah, it's really clever. But it's, I think it's been a couple of years since I've sent this out, but there was some research that said when when, with graphing, if you use things like teddy bears or something like that, they don't understand graphing. Really? Yeah. Do you remember that? I think I sent that out. It was,
I remember that.
because I don't claim to be an elementary expert. I'm not. I taught Montessori up to 2nd grade, but I don't
But
know
if you
that.
find that, send it again.
Sarah, write that down. She's going to be doing some literature review, so that'd be something that she can Google with it.
You asked a question, I want to make a comment as well. Something that I do is I have them write the objective on the board. They have their TEKS, but then on the board they have their objective, and it has to include all of what the TEKS is. But the objective has to be in understandable language that the kids can understand.
Kind of like this
What I'm going to
says.
teach and what you're going to understand after the class is done.
Now, how do you allow them the flexibility when they're doing inquiry when they cannot tell the learning objective in a way? I mean, I can see that you'll learn how to count by twos or whatever it is, but not how you're going to get there. Or you're at the end of this, you're going to learn that certain, X birds come at 9 o'clock and Y birds come at noon. You can't do that with inquiry.
That's true, because you're
That's a good
giving the
point.
You
answer.
have to be able to know that, as an administrator, know that that's inquiry, and so you wait for the end of the lesson.
Well,
You need to
I
come
could
back.
see saying in this inquiry, you're going to learn if different birds come at 9 o'clock or noon or 2. I mean, you
Maybe
just
under
flip it
science, you have
around
the
it.
question, you actually,
Yeah.
you're posting
Right,
the
and
question.
the question would be
And we call that the
sufficient.
research question.
Yeah,
The
and
question
that would be
versus
more than
what's the
sufficient,
objective.
because
Right.
they're still,
But you have to tell your teachers that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, you have to be very specific.
Yeah, because I've been in schools that, it's adamant, you have got to have that learning objective. We talked about maybe having a cover over it and then lifting it up when it's time. There's a lot of ways, but you cannot negate inquiry by having it tell them the answer.
And I've
You
gone
can't do
into
that.
into like Alita's classroom
Uh-huh.
and asked why. That wasn't, and so then, she explained, oh, yeah, okay, it makes sense. So I think it just takes communication and conversations as to why it was.
And she has to not feel threatened that you ask
Exactly.
why, that
Yeah.
you don't understand.
And that they're not going to be penalized for it,
Yeah,
because.
yeah, that's important too, not to be penalized.
Mhm.
But I could see having them turn it into a research question. That'd be valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so again, to understand the TEKS, having them go through this, because, our teachers at my stage that I get them, they hardly know what the TEKS are at all, let alone science. I would say when they get out of here, and this is what our principals have said, is your science teachers understand the TEKS, or at least some parts of it.
amazing how helpful that is.
Yeah. So, they have to understand what college and career readiness and how it's, an end game, so to speak, and what kind of ELPs, when are the students going to speak and when are they going to write, and so they have to write all of those kind of details in. And then something that we've added is the star released items, so they can see how it could be assessed. I think some of the items are really clever.
Yeah, me too.
And so, as I said, I'm a fan of Science Star, except for a couple of areas that I've mentioned to you.
I have to say, Jennifer did a great job. I was in the lab one day with her, and I swear the lab was set up to look exactly like one of the diagrams that were on one of the release tests, and her questioning was amazing. So she was asking questions way beyond what it had, but I was like, I think I've seen that picture on one of the release tests. It was with the balance, but so I was like, it's important for them to know what it looks like, so they're preparing
And
those.
they're using materials.
Exactly.
That's one of the good things I think about STAR is that they should drive it toward best practices. I don't know how people have got vocabulary out of it, but at any rate. But I would say, you don't just use those. You use a different setup so that they are not just looking for one way to do things.
This was a Saturday camp, so she was on target. She was
Yeah.
ready.
Okay. And then we have what kind of prerequisite knowledge, so that might be previous TEKS, or, it can be a variety of things, including the previous TEKS. And then what kind of alternate or misconceptions do children have? There's a chapter in the Benchmarks for Science Literacy, Chapter 15, that identifies those, and that's old. That's 1993, I think, something like that. But that's one of the few things you can Google and find out what misconceptions are. And if you don't have inquiries that challenge those misconceptions, they're not going to change their mind about something just because you tell them. They have to experience it. And then real life applications. If you go back to the meta-analysis, it had that in there, an enhanced context of real life applications. And so what I'm trying to get them to do is think about, if they're teaching 14-year-olds, if they're teaching 10-year-olds, what kind of experiences do your children have that would fit with that? And ask them. You know, I couldn't always figure it out, but I would ask the kids, and they'd say, oh yeah, we use this when we do that, or whatever. I'm gonna write that down real quick and put that in a lesson. So to find out what are real life applications where it makes some kind of sense to the kids. And then, yes, academic vocabulary is important, but not all words are important. I see way too many academic vocabulary words in schools. They do not have to know the name of something to understand it. And we've gone beyond the pale with the focus on academic vocabulary. It is just nauseating what I see, how it's killed science.
Part of that, though, is because of ELLs. What they've discovered is that they're pretty proficient in everyday language.
Social language. Mm-hmm.
But when you cross the line into academic language, that they're totally lost. And so a requirement in class is that you have to, for your ELL qualification, you've got to in class include vocabulary understanding.
You should do that for all of them, but not all words.
Well, and that,
Not all science. That's the point. It's not that you don't see, because I've got it in there. Important academic vocabulary. I'll go back to the 5th grade complete circuits. Series and parallel are not important academic vocabulary.
Problem is the instructor deciphering and determining what is valuable and important and what's unnecessary. And that seems to be a challenge, because who's educated them in that? Mm-hmm. Not many do. You do an exceptional job with your students. I'm going to tell you this. When most people come out of college to teach, they are so ill-equipped, so dumb. Excuse me, uneducated, yes. It's hard not to think dumb. But uneducated when they come out, and it's like, what did they teach you? Or how did you pass these classes? It's just, maybe it's the ones I see, I don't know. But I don't
No,
know.
I think you're right, and I have to say that what we do, I think, is unique, but we have very high expectations.
But what you do is you have critical thinking in your course. I mean, you require them to do rigor and critical thinking.
But they don't like it.
Because it's work.
That's right.
And a lot of universities do not do that. So when they get to a teaching environment,
Sarah's going.
they get to a teaching environment, it's like, duh, well, let's see, how am I going to do this? And there you go.
Right.
And who gets to teach them? The principals, the administrators. Thank you so much.
Well, we try.
Yes.
But I can tell you, my students don't like it. They do not like my course
They don't
until
like
they get to student teaching.
And
And then they come
realize how
back,
valuable it is.
and in fact, I've got one who just made a videotape for me, and she went on for 25 minutes. Johnny Cervantes, you probably know her, Anna, she's in Mix. And she said, I
Yes,
didn't like this
Johnny,
course when
yeah.
I took it with Dr. West. And but she said, now I see the value of it. And I had another student that was really at odds with me. It was a personal thing with her. I don't get personal with them, but they get personal. And she didn't like me, she didn't like the course. And she called me in May, and she had taken over a sub course that the teacher coach had not taught anything all year. And she had a 90% pass rate. She said, Dr. West, I did what you told me to do, and it worked.
Yep.
So it was, it was a nice affirmation, but it's hard work.
But what you
We spent a lot of time,
can do
ask Sarah, Sarah's in there with us.
is say to them, I want you to know that this course can make the difference between you being hired and not hired. Because with this knowledge,
Can I get
a
that on
principal
tape?
is more likely to hire you over another teacher, everything else being equal.
Mhm.
Because I will look for that. That's the person I'm going to hire.
Yeah. Well, somebody asked about hiring when Anna and I were in TEPSA, and we're gonna get into that with the chart that we're gonna get into later, about some things that I would recommend and that some of you, I actually would like some input from y'all on that chart when we get to it. Anyway, so very explicit that they have to do all of this to prepare for a lesson. They have to list the materials, what the teacher's going to use, what each student is going to use, they're per group of 2 or 4 students, what other kind of resources that they need. And so this is pretty much before they ever get to plan the lesson. This is preparing to plan the lesson. And in my course, I make them complete this before they ever start telling me about any kind of a lesson. Because otherwise, they're going to make poor choices.
And then what's going to happen is, think about it, this is every day.
Yes,
This is every day.
yes.
And you're going to hear squealing and screaming and yelling and hollering at teachers. When do I have the time to do that? Just grading alone takes me till 8 o'clock at night.
Exactly.
So,
But what I'm hoping for our students is this is second nature. They're not going to have to write it all down. They're going to know. It's like me talking about complete circuits. I don't know exactly what the teachers say about that, but I know approximately what the teachers say about things. And so I can go back, I just get that feeling, well, this doesn't feel right, so I go back and I check it because of this. And this is the idea that they're not going to have time to do all that, and they don't. And I tell my students, I said, this is not realistic. You will not have time to do this in the real world, but you have time to do it now, and it's a way of thinking, it's a way of pattern of planning that if you don't do it this way, you are not going to have effective instruction. Your children will not learn, and it's your fault if they
what I
don't do
could
that.
see is a principal requiring a teacher to do at least one of these a week.
Mhm.
And that way, they are developing a pattern, and that could help. I could certainly see that.
Well, even, in science, you have TEKs that have multiple concepts in them. So if there is a strand, if you want to call it that they would do it for that strand. And that, I think, would be helpful with them. And it might be once a week, it
So
might
I'd like
be,
to see that. That would be so.
yeah.
good.
And then on the back, it has the science, the same thing for the science, yeah. We've already talked about the, where's the STEM lesson planning principles, Sarah?
It's a few pages later. It is the first purple page past your pink.
Okay. Anna, would you like to discuss this?
You're on.
Oh my gosh, if I can, one thing that I try to embed in teachers.
Oh, they need to look at this. This is
Yes,
Anna's right here.
Oh my gosh. You cannot, speaking of math, Faith, it's like the concrete to the pictorial to the abstract. If the kids have never seen base 10 blocks, they can't touch it, feel it, do it, because that's, especially with our ELL learners and low socioeconomic status kids, how can you teach something that you've never, it just blows my mind away. How are you going to teach addition or subtraction without, with regrouping, it's just like, you're gonna teach it by flashing it on the screen and looking at a picture. Well,
But if they've never experienced
they've never
it,
experienced
they're
it.
not gonna understand. It's like my aha moment with Party Punch. I mean, you can see how sold I am on it because I experienced learning with the math manipulators.
And it's primary teachers, I'd say, kinder first teachers are more apt to do this, but the older that you
They think
second,
it's
third
baby
grade,
stuff.
yeah, it's like, oh, they've already learned it, they did it in kinder and first. Well, and then you try to incorporate it and you try to teach that, I had some fifth graders who've never seen face blocks before. And then, It's just, it's
I had a first grade
disastrous.
teacher that was teaching all numerical equations. And I was like, and she wondered why nobody got it. And I'm like, where are your manipulatives?
I think though too, the textbook has such great pictures that they skip over the hands-on.
Yeah.
Like that's,
And you can't.
I'm like, just put the textbook away, study it for yourself. How are they teaching it? What are they doing? Okay,
They don't have activities with the manipulatives in the math textbook?
It's like a tear out.
it's a
Yeah,
tear out,
no.
you're supposed to put the manipulatives on top of it. Well, they skip that and just go to the one where there's a picture. I'm like,
So it's a picture of
the
like
picture's showing
the
them
10
what to
frame.
do.
And,
You know,
and it's,
like-
and especially with the, I have one second grade teacher, and I think this year she'll retire, that it's just like, dear Lord, oh, but the textbook, and I was like, you're not teaching the textbook, you're teaching the TEKS. And nothing says that you have to use every lesson, every day, the textbook. If you're not doing this, the cognitive tutorial to the app, they're not gonna get it. They're just not gonna
I'd be
get it.
surprised if the textbook did not have this. I mean, this is old.
It does, but the teachers aren't, so
They
it
skip
is,
over it.
there's the
I see what you're
first
saying,
page,
though. I'm talking about
it's
the
telling
rest.
you, put the, like, let's just say best 10 box, put the 100 block here, put the tens block, put 3 tens blocks here, put 2, now take away whatever, so you're supposed to be doing it.
Or
But then
But
the
not
very
the-
next page is actually
Students are supposed to be
pictures,
doing
pictures
it,
of
No,
not
and
the
that's the
teacher.
thing, the
Or you
teachers.
see the teacher do
teachers
it at
doing
the front.
Exactly,
And the kids watch.
yeah.
That's
no.
why I'm like, study it, okay, how am I supposed to do this, what I'm supposed, okay, then put it away, then take out the blocks. Okay, guys, if we're gonna make 115, how do we do that? What are you gonna use? What?
Maybe a slower scope and sequence the first 6 or 9 weeks
That's a good idea.
might better enable that.
Problem is they get used to that pace
Mhm.
and they want to keep that pace. And if they keep that pace, they're not going to get through and get all of the TEKS done. That's why you've got to have a TEKS calendar. Because you've got to,
Pacing
and
calendar.
yeah, you've got
I-
to pace yourself.
But it has to, well, what I'm saying though, theoretically, because I don't know, but theoretically, could you have a slower pace initially and then you, because they have such a great foundation, they're gonna be able to move a little faster. through
And they could certainly do
others.
that. They would have to program it in.
Mhm.
And ideally, they're familiar enough with their content area that they would know, okay, I can squeeze it in here and I can squeeze in here so I could take longer here. And they'll know what they could squeeze.
Mhm.
So that would be a way to do it.
And
As long as
that
they
would be a
still
really
have it in the
experienced set
calendar.
of teachers would have to do that.
So they would have fewer
I would
TEKS at
think.
the beginning, but more TEKS at the end.
I
Yeah,
think
cover.
there's this,
Maybe.
I've seen, I don't know about you guys, it's like, we want a grade. This is the easiest way to get it, is by filling out a worksheet. This is the Monday through Friday timeline. It has it all set out for me already. That
Good plan.
exactly.
Carry it out.
And that's my thing is,
Cookie cutter teaching.
yes. So get the manipulatives out. You need a grade. Let them write about what they did. Take that grade, read it, and say they've got this understanding. They don't have this understanding. I need to reteach. But it doesn't have to be. Well, and then multiple choice throws me.
Even more so.
Oh my gosh! Like everyone can guess or color code. I'm gonna do 3 A's and 2 B's. Like
Well, you know, there's not one answer why this occurs. There are multiple answers. One is they don't know how. They've never been taught, and we had the discussion about Region 13 offering the hands-on manipulatives. And
and they don't.
And they don't. And I've asked them why, and they said, well, they haven't had a request for it.
I'd be curious to see what these new math academies, what they're actually, because when I did the math academies 30 years ago, we did, that's where I learned. I didn't learn this at college, I learned at the service center during the math academies,
Yeah,
how to
those
use the
were
basic,
pretty good,
how
I
to use the
understand.
manipulatives. I don't know what, I'd be curious just to go sit in and watch to see how they're gonna teach the math academies.
They're not all grade levels, though.
No, I think it's
Second
third,
and third from math.
And next year
Yes.
they'll cycle more.
Yes.
Kinder first
It's
next year?
kinder
no
one
reading
for
is kinder
reading.
first.
No, that's this year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And second, third for math.
Yeah.
But I saw a time frame that next year they're
Yes,
gonna cycle
yes.
more in.
And it's all
and I
about
think
the-
the teachers think, they don't realize how much time they're wasting there. I don't have time to do all this, I don't, but if they just did it right the first time, then you wouldn't have to be making up lost ground and having to reteach.
And having to teach tricks later so
Right.
that they can get the right answer.
But I think that comes with
But
experience.
still not
too,
understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're not gonna, we can tell them till we're blue in the face, but until they experience it themselves, then.
I want to finish this, lunch is here, I want to finish this first part and then we'll go to the next page after lunch. But what we've tried to do here is to give examples in science and math, to explain it and then give examples. So in the concrete, there's a quote there that says, "The mind cannot forget what the hand has learned." I learned that from a football coach. And I like to go back to the story of, what's his name, from California. I heard him over the radio the other day. Anyway, he said that when his team was having trouble, but even at the very beginning, he said, I taught them how to put on their socks. Because if you don't put the socks on correctly, you get blisters, etc., etc. And he says, I taught the fundamentals, and he said when they were having trouble on the field, he said we'd start back and we'd say, this is a football. So the idea that the mind cannot forget what the hand has learned makes so much sense in math, particularly. But it also makes sense in science, because that's where they're learning the pattern in the physical way, so to speak, the concrete way. So that's why we've listed all of these tangible objects, things they can touch, feel, smell, etc. A model or kinesthetic is and that's the students doing these things, not the teacher. Field trips, using specimens, manipulatives. Oh, there's kinesthetic again. I thought I edited that one out, Sarah. We have to check that. So we've given some math examples there that you can see. And then below we've given, when they're teaching the movement of the sun, earth, and moon, there's a great video from the Private Universe series where the teacher has the model, the model that they have, and the teacher's up at the front, and she's demonstrating this, and it's sitting down on a desk, and the student's face is right in front of it. And I'm thinking, how do those kids in the back see that?
You can even see
And yeah, and you can see them doing this. and she's saying, Anna, you understand that? You got that? Got that, Faith? I mean, there was, really poor questioning strategies. And she was not a bad teacher, it wasn't that. But she just did not use best practices. And then they interview a student the next year about this same concept. And you can see, Sarah's going to show that to you later, you can see the impact of what poor teaching practices, what poor instruction does to an excellent student. This is a very good student. So we've listed things like taking students outside to see the trees in their yard, or bringing in leaf specimens. So very concrete experiences with them. Or students kinesthetically modeling the position of atomic particles, which is what they would do in school. And so it's all about what the students are doing in these things that is very physical, or could be smell, or hearing, could be hearing. We need to change that, Sarah. And then pictorial, we actually have a new version of this, so it's pictorial / representational. and I'm going to go back to concrete. So concrete would also mean the students drawing things, okay, versus looking at it in a book or looking at a drawing on a screen. That's pictorial representational, and it's a step away from being concrete. So using pictures or visuals that are tied to a concrete representation. So again, I think Suzanne, you talked about that in thinking that they could just see the manipulative and not have to use it, but they have to use it, then see it, and draw it, perhaps even, as in between. Simulations. So we saw a big movement of frog dissections. Oh, let's substitute it with a simulation online. No, it's not the same. The first time I dissected a frog, the teacher had us feel the atrium, the top and the lower ventricle chamber. The atrium is is the pumping chamber and the ventricle is a holding chamber. The holding chamber is like a half-filled balloon. The ventricle is like a tough muscle. It's like a gizzard. I mean, it is just as firm as when I touch this. I will never forget that. But I had to touch it, and that's all I did. I just did this, and I will never forget that. And I did that how many decades ago? You just cannot, you cannot skip the concrete experience. So the examples would be like graphs of the data. So the students would experience gathering the data, then they would graph the data, not the teacher graph the data, etc. So I'll go back to the Earth, Moon position diagram. So the students would diagram that or show the movement in some way that is not them physically doing it, or even, you know, you can have students hold a flashlight to be the sun, and then they hold these little styrofoam balls to be the earth, and, you know, that would be a concrete way to do it. Then they could diagram that, and it sounds like it's redundant, but that's how we know people learn. And then the abstract, words and numbers are abstract. You don't start with a word. You don't start with vocabulary. And I know with ELLs, they often tell you to do that. That's not right for science or math. Do you get to the academic vocabulary? You bet. You don't start with it though. And I know I was with Rod Trevino one day, and he was going around. He's very gracious and allows me to go in his classrooms. And so we went in there, and his ELL specialist was in there. So they were using the SIM model. And I was trying to understand the SIM model because I needed to do that to be able to help, you know, my teachers and my student teachers. So I was looking at it and it had this academic vocabulary list on the left side, if you're familiar with the SIM model. And I said, well, tell me about that. And they said, well, we start with the academic vocabulary. And I went, no, not in science and math. You do not do that. You don't begin with the vocabulary. And the ELL specialist said, really? We always do that. Well, that might be okay for ELA, it might be okay for social studies, it is not okay for science and math. Do you get to that academic vocabulary? You bet. But you do not start with it. It makes no sense. It'd be like me learning the definition of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a Spanish word, I'm not very good at Spanish, but you know, some noun.
Perro.
Okay. That's butt, isn't it?
No.
Well, that's dog, but arrow, the other way, one arm, but.
Okay, all right, anyway, so, oh yeah, so I'm gonna write, you know,
I like that.
what perro is, and I'm gonna write it in Spanish,
Yeah.
right? I have no connection with
Yeah,
that
that's right.
unless I've had experience with a dog, because oftentimes it's not common words like that. It's ones they've never heard of before. So you cannot start with the academic vocabulary. All right, so there's examples there in math about the equations, formulas, explaining position in words of, again, the Earth, Sun, Moon orbiting issues, and describing an oak tree. Well, they need to touch an oak tree. They need to see an oak tree before they have any kind of description with it, etc. So do you get to that? You bet. You have to. It builds that vocabulary that they need, but it's only important words. It's not all science words are important. Series, parallel are not important words. A complete circuit is important.
What did you learn
Protons
today?
and
It makes
neutrons.
series and parallel. You said that, I think, like 5 times. Yeah,
The
no.
problem is
Series and
the
parallel.
teacher knowing what words are important and what not, what words are not important. And they've not been educated in that either. How are they gonna-
STAR should help with that, and if it does not, then it needs to be changed. And that's essentially what I've told TEA. You drive instruction, and I work with the assessment division. I work with their director, and I have testified in public that I like Science STAR. I have been a supporter of it. So, you know, I think I'm a friendly critic, if you would. And if there's a problem, then they need to know we're a team. You know, all of us, TEA, you, me, you know, we're all a team. And it's for kids. And what's good for kids is what we should do.
I appreciate you going before and testifying, so thank you.
Well, I need input. So what you guys see and you see needs, that's important for those of us who do those kind of things to know it. But I'm not in there every day, you guys are in the trenches, and you need to, and I need to see it too, so I can give example. Laura, our geology instructor, also testified about, there is a superintendent from Granger District who came in and testified that there are too many science teaks. His little 5th grade science teacher had taken every process teak and matched it to every content. He said there are, I'll make this number up, 300 science teaks.
I don't think so.
No, there are 29 in the 5th grade. There are not 300. And if you know anything about science, you don't teach the processes in isolation. You teach them, you use observation skill to learn about, what's 5th grade? Series circuits, no, complete circuits, right? So anyway, and there's lots of misinformation out there. So that's why it's important for all of us to get that understanding. And you work with a lot of other principals, other districts, not just in your district, but other districts, and they have those kind of important conversations. So everybody ready for lunch? Okay. So Sarah, are they outside?
Get this
Bring it in?
right outside.
Okay.
That's got everybody's names on
And
it.
you'll
Ready to